Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good day, good evening. You are all over the world, and it's just wonderful to see such wonderful response to our invitation to this roundtable. It is a really great opportunity for me to be able to host and moderate this panel. My name is Susanne Moser. I'm a senior advisor to the International Science Council's Transformations to Sustainability program. And as I said, it's my honor to moderate today's discussion. And so I just want to first acknowledge who this is put on by, that basically the International Science Council, together with the Belmont Forum and the North Face Network, all of whom are funding transdisciplinary research on the social dimensions of transformations to sustainability. God, it's a mouthful, but that's what we do. So welcome everyone to this. What got us here to this roundtable is probably what is exactly the motivation for all of you to come here, which is that everyone talks about transformations. And it's a really big question. Is it just a buzzword, or is that actually, is there substance to that? Can we agree on the meaning of that term? Is that useful even, that we do agree on a term and a common definition, a shared definition? And what can we learn about transformations? What have we learned during the pandemic? Does that change our understanding maybe of what transformation is or what it should be? And specifically, is there something for the research community? What can we as researchers do to help bring about the urgent need for transformations? To help us answer that and help us answer these and related questions, we have invited three leading scholars. Many of you are familiar with them. They are both deeply in the research, but they also all have a foot in practice, which I think is really essential. We're not just bystanders, we're in the middle of it, we participate and contribute to transformations to sustainability. So I want to just very briefly introduce them. We have longer bios at the event webpage, and someone from ISC is just going to put the link to that event page to it, so we don't have to spend time on introducing folks in detail. But very briefly, we have Ulrich Brand, who is a professor of international politics at the University of Vienna. We have Cheikh Mbow, the director of Future Africa at the University of Pretoria, and we have Karen O'Brien, professor of human geography at the University of Oslo. So you all see their cameras come on, and if you want to just, pin the speakers or just those four, that would be wonderful. But you see the breadth of people who have joined today. We had over 200 people sign up for this, people who consider themselves thought leaders in the field, people who are just beginning to wrap their heads around what transformation is, and everything in between. So it's a wonderful opportunity to dive into this. So welcome Ulrich, Cheikh, and Karen. It's great to have you here. And let me just, before we get into the discussion, also say we're going to record this particular panel discussion just so it's available for everyone who couldn't make it this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. And that and questions from the panels, any background materials, anything that they wanted to share with us is available, and you will get a link to that page where all of that will be posted after this event. So I'd like to start with you, Karen. And really, I want to start with the toughest question of them all, which is, what do you feel are the core elements of a definition or a conceptualization of transformation to sustainability? Is there anything that we all should agree on?
Okay, great. First, I'd like to say thanks for inviting me to this Zoomy roundtable, and hi to everybody who's joining today. And I think it's a really good question to start with, because if we think about transformation, which, as you mentioned, is becoming a really big buzzword, we see it defined in the dictionary as a marked change in nature, form, or appearance. And, and that's very, mean anything. But when we start to look at it in terms of normative goals like sustainability, equity, justice, or a world where all life can thrive, it involves much more than just outcomes and appearances. In fact, it's really a process itself. And that's a process that all of us are involved in, whatever our role in society is. So when I think of transformation, I think of it as a significant shift in form, structure, or meaning making, but also about capacity and unleashing of our individual and shared capacities to commit to a world that works for everybody. And this is not something that is immediate and readily visible. So it's almost that we have to be able to imagine what we're transforming into and bring that potential into the present. So I think that's a really important thing, and it's the challenge for research, for policy, and for practice in terms of how do we bring that together.
Thank you. That's well, Ulrich, I want to turn to you for this, to expand on this. I know you have written and sort of tried to sort different approaches and definitions to transformation. I wonder if you would add something to it or differ from what Karen just said, and also maybe speak to this question of how do you then integrate very different perspectives in this of working on transformation?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm also very happy to be here. Karen did much more comprehensive work in systematizing it, but I tried it again. And I'm skeptical whether definition makes sense, but maybe a common understanding. Of course, Karen outlined, let's say, the basic common understanding, but I would like to remind the historical context when the transformation debate started. It was
Can we just ask Marjo Dete, whatever, sorry to mispronounce your name, to put yourself on mute?
Yes, thank you. It was the IPCC report.
Hang on, Ulrich, one second. I just want to make sure. I see if you can mute others, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Ulrich.
Okay, my first point is very briefly that the historical context when the term emerged was the 2007 report of the IPCC. It was the financial crisis, and it was the collapse of the Copenhagen conference in 2009. And there was a sensation that we need something more profound than the ecological modernization of sustainability policies at this time. And the second is that the only consent I see beside this, at the general level, what Karen outlined is that a post-fossil fuel or post-fossil economy. This, I would say, what the IPCC said in the 2018 report, that in order to limit global warming, we need a rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented change. I would say this is a consent in the debate. But when it comes to other aspects, how to change and what to change, whether we should change the markets, what do we understand by markets, what do we understand by the state, the role of the state, the role of values, this is, I would say, still an open question. It must be an open question because, and this is my argument in the debate, and also the motivation for the projects, for the research projects under the header of your program, to look carefully on the ontological assumptions, not only as an academic endeavor, but because it's highly political. How do I understand the capacity of the state? Is the state part of the problem, or is the state part of the solution, a regulator? Is the market, green growth, part of the solution or part of the problem? So my point is, we don't need a definition. We need maybe a core understanding that we want in order to combat climate change. We need a post-fossil fuel society, but then we should engage in debates and to bring our different understandings of transformation onto the table.
That's great. I want to come back to some of the issues that you have pointed out are common elements of our understanding. For example, that it's rapid, unprecedented, and comprehensive, because I could imagine a big debate right on that topic. But before I go there, Cheikh, I want to bring you in and ask you, you bring, a perspective from the global South, very different disciplines, very different experiences in practice. What would you add? Where would you differ in what, are some common elements of our understanding of transformation?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the organizers to give me the opportunity to bring the Southern perspective into this big debate of transformation. Allow me to just echo what my colleagues just say by taking the more pragmatic aspect of transformation. My first point is transformation always occurs. It happens anyway. But what we are looking at is the intentional transformation we want towards sustainability. And that's where the big difference is happening. And in questioning that, practical implications for sustainable development, what do we need to do differently to be to that space, as Karen just mentioned, in terms of process? And that's where I think we need to put our fingers on. And I tried to get 3 phases or 3 dimensions of transformation. The last phase being the transformation, that's the last mile. But what comes before? What comes before to me is a number of principles, and that's where we need to agree. What are the principles we need to agree in this process? The first principle to me is a greater, importance of sustainability in our development model everywhere we go. So just taking transformation towards sustainability as a principle of development, it means that all the business model, the business as usual, needs to be changed towards that new concept. The second principle to me is better transdisciplinarity knowledge, more cross-cutting knowledge. Many of the things we are talking about for transformation towards sustainability are not on sectors. And you and I, we have discussed this, Susie, in Future Earth, and Karen was contributing to that. And that way leads to creation of knowledge action network, where people comes together and try to co-create new knowledge which address wicked issue, because we are dealing with a planet which is complex. So that second concept of transdisciplinarity is important. The second one, I think Karen mentioned it, is the issue of outcomes and the relationship that people need to establish. So in that process, the 3 phases which I think are important is the discovery. We need to rediscover our purpose and the discovery of new solutions for sustainable environment. The second one is innovation, is how to put different discoveries together to create a new layer of information. And transformation to me comes at the end, which is the scaling up and a wide, application of all those knowledge to create a better society, a new social transformation that leads to improve well-being, ecosystems, and environment. That is, to me, the more practical, consideration that I bring on the table. And I agree with Ulrich that spending too much time on the concepts and discussing it will just, make us lose time. Let's go to the practicalities of it.
Well, it's interesting. I come back to both of you. Hang on one second, but I want to, put a pin in particular the issue that you just said around transdisciplinarity. We're going to come back to that question. What kind of science we need to maybe help move things along. But Karen, I want to come back to you first on you named the normative direction very clearly. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about value side of this, and because we don't all agree on the direction, right? So how does that feature into our understanding of transformation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, building on what Ulrich and Cheikh have said, that, the problem with transformation, or any concept for that matter, is that each of us interprets it from our own perspective or mindset, and then we expect everyone else to do the same. And so what is transformative to one person or to me might just be business as usual to somebody else. And that is, then we start to then put our point the finger and say, we need to transform this or that on behalf of so-and-so. And it can come across as very oppressive, or as, creating conflict and polarization. So I think that, exactly as Ulrich is saying, that rather than focusing on this common definition or something, we can actually focus on the underlying values of what is important for the person and for others, and then start to surface those and make those transparent, and see how that relates to the intentions and the agreed upon types of things, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement and everything. So surfacing the values rather than hiding them through these definitional debates that are leading to where we're seeing very different systems and talking about them.
Well, I appreciate that, the need to make our assumptions, our epistemologies, our normative commitments explicit, but that to me almost, when you say that my transformation is someone else's normal change, then I think we get into deep trouble. And that really questions why we have now a whole science on transformation at all, right? Nothing new under the sun. So Ulrich, you had your hand up. I want to bring you back in to just react to some of what you heard.
I changed my first name to Uli, which is usually my spelled name, because Ulrich is quite difficult for me in many languages. I would like to take up your point. Of course, at a very general and abstract level, we will agree on principles. But I think Cheikh highlighted this. If we think from a procedural perspective, the first or one of the first steps beside the principles would be to acknowledge the different interests. Because if I work on Latin America, not on Africa, but in Latin America, many mining companies would also say we contribute to sustainability because we get the money that the state can then distribute, and we export the products and we are more sustainable than 20 years ago, et cetera, in oil exploitation, mining, and so on. So I think, and also very important for research, to understand that there are legitimate different interests, but also that among the interests there are power relations. And if we want, if we have in sustainability research also the question of justice, not only of ecological sustainability, then we should think to do research and then also take political actions, how to restrict certain interests of the mining companies, of the digital giants, et cetera, in the process of transformation. So I would say beside the values and the principles, it's to acknowledge interest and to deal effectively with interest. And we are in a world which goes into a non-sustainability direction. Yeah, I call it imperial mode of living in my research. Yeah, that it's or Ingolf Blüdon in Vienna, he calls it the sustainability of unsustainability. There is a broad agreement in the world society to exploit nature and to maintain global inequality. Cheikh, you know this better than I in your experience in Africa. So how to deal with it? And I would say the entry point is to look at the interests, at the different interests.
Okay, Cheikh, you respond and then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, Uli, you're totally right. I think every transformation should be analyzed in its own context because it's hooked up on real norms and local values. And it cannot be top down. It's always bottom up. And most of the global thinking on transformation are top down. That's why we have a lot of impediments in getting it. The reason why it should be top down is that transformation comes with new rationale. We need to change our mind structure. I get a background noise, Susie. Can we fix that?
Yes, can I ask again for people to mute themselves? Thank you. Did you want to conclude anything else or?
Yeah, I want to conclude very quickly telling that the reason why it's so difficult to create that, contextualization of it is it comes with new rationale and it needs a lot of engagement with communities to get that new rationale. It comes with new narratives. It comes with a lot of not transactions, but transformative actions on the ground. It's not about numbers. So, and to create all those new things, you need to look at the governance structure in place. You need to look at the financial structures because, these things are not free of charge. It's a lot of investment if you want to create transformation towards sustainability. And the funding structure we have in place are still the old model of funding, development. These green funds we are talking about are real tiny money compared to the big investment we need for transformation. The engagement between private, public, and people in terms of collaborative work is still lacking. There are a lot of pledge that public-private partnership would happen, etc. But at the scale of the development we want to establish, that is really very minimal. So there is a number of asymmetry here that is created by the type of information and the communication which is put in place for people to understand what is the benefits, the local benefits of creating that transformation, and that capacity for communities to embrace those new concepts and narratives is absolutely a big challenge. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to push you a little bit harder with the next question, but I want to, before I do that, just invite everyone. I already see a few things happening in the chats. If you have questions to any of the panelists on the things we're discussing, please put them there. And we will sort through them and try to get to as many of them after a little bit of these opening commentary here, and then come back to the questions. So just enter them into the chat and we'll try to get to them. So I want to just be provocative and simply say that whatever you've said so far, you could have said about any kind of change, about any kind of politics, about any kind of, I don't know, topic in social sciences or in the human environment relationship. I don't find you yet telling me what is a transformation, what isn't a transformation. So my next question to you is trying to get you to be maybe even more clear about how would I see one? I think one of you said that, in fact, transformation happens all the time. It's just maybe a matter of intentionality of, where we're headed. But how would I see one? Many of us study transformations and talk about how it's incremental, and it's really hard to know whether any of the small increments of change we see actually lead to anything transformative at all. So how do you know that, this isn't garden variety change, but this is transformative change? How do you know the difference? And whoever wants to start with that.
I can quickly, I think if we try to give some examples, I would take a risk because every example will have its own drawback. But if I take the cell phone in Africa, a small device itself, a cell phone is a number of discovery and it's an innovation by itself. But the repurposing of the cell phone to serve the medical services, to serve the banking services, to serve the social ties, to leapfrog on the information sharing has been absolutely transformative for Africa. From where I'm sitting in Pretoria, I can, fix my bills, electricity bills and water in Senegal. Just think about 10 years before, 20 years before, how those things would have been possible through the complex banking system. So, you have a system now which is just based on, creation of knowledge and innovation that shorten a process which accelerate the well-being of people in terms of, service delivery and information access. And to me, that is one, clear example how things can be, transformative. And it creates a lot of, cascade effects in terms of the security of people, the possibility for elderlies to access, the funds from their kids' remittances in a very quick way. And the creation of this network, we call it social network, but it's just a network where the rural and the urban can interact on market opportunities. And that has accelerated and created a lot of transformation internally. Coming from Senegal, I know that the people who are harvesting their own onions and potatoes in the Nyais would know today what is the current price of those products in Dakar, the main city, before they send their product to those markets. Just because there is one device which have been positively used, which help them optimize the market value of their product and the resource use of their country. To me, using those examples will just show how we see transformation in the context of sustainability in this very particular case.
Karen, what would you add on how we can recognize something as transformational versus any kind of change, any other kind of change?
Well, I think that in pointing what Cheikh pointed to, the shifting systems and structures and cultures is really a part of it, because they are the way they are because we've ordered the world in that way. And for me, a real change is when we change our relationships, where we draw the line between us and other species, future generations. And we live in a world where, many people are just considered to be expendable, really not to matter. And when we start to actually say wow, where does our circle of care end, including with, other species, future generations, you start to see that little shift here in the way that we're approaching it. And then it's why would we ever create a system that extracts, or thinks of labor as, not mattering, or coastal communities as not mattering, or anything for that matter. And so I think that to be able to link those very practical examples that we heard about of technologies that are promoting sustainability with the political dimensions, with the personal dimensions, and recognize that these are seamless. They're not separate. We're always coming from somewhere. And that's where I think when you say, like, how do we know a transformation? It's almost like you can see it in the people who are really caring about, who are marching on the streets and things like that. They can envision that different world and imagine that different world, and are willing to actually make those changes to shift interests and power structures and the politics. And we see that everywhere in the world now.
Uli?
Yes, of course, there are technological changes, there are subjective changes, and Cheikh gave a very good example. But if we talk about sustainability transformations, I have two ideas. One idea is that to change a social order, to change a world, the hard criteria, this is why I started with the IPCC, is when the emissions and the resource use go remarkably down, when there is a downsizing, at least in the global north, of production and consumption patterns. And we cannot see this in the process, and we can see this maybe after some years, that it's really a downsizing of emissions and of resource use. This would, I would say, might be a common sense within sustainability research. Not the example Cheikh gave. Of course, there is a lot of transformation. Globalization is a transformation. Digitalization is a transformation. Our meeting today is an outcome of a transformation process we had over the last. Another idea I would like to point at is the idea from Karl Polanyi, who is with the book Great Transformation a major reference. And I learned from the work from Andreas Novi, also from Vienna, he highlights a distinction made by Polanyi, which might be very important for us. Polanyi uses in his analysis from the pre-industrial, the agrarian society to the industrial society, he uses the term transformation. And he uses great transformation for the political intervention when the liberals in the 1920s learned the liberal capitalism is in crisis, we lean towards fascism. When the elites promoted fascism. This is Polanyi's argument in the Great Transformation from 1944. So my point would be, coming back to your question, Susie, if a social, ecological, or sustainable transformation process is successful, we might see in some years, and then we discuss criteria like remarkable reduction of emissions. But in the course of this, we have to be conscious. What are the struggles, the conflicts, the policies, the learning processes, etc., to push this process? And these are two, let's say, two aspects of transformation, if I made it clear.
I think what you're pointing to makes me think that, without trying to be too linear about it, there is a very distinct set of signals to be noted in society, depending on where you are in a transformation. So this kind of hardening that you just talked about with people leaning toward fascism, which are essentially certainties, right? Very clear certainties about what should be, what is right in the face of great uncertainty. That to me is sort of a clear signal of an early phase of a transformation. Because it, when we're ending things, the old systems, when we're loosening up and we don't know where we are, I think in that uncertainty, there is a huge tendency to go to the fundamentalist sort of certainties that anchor us. And I think to me, that's a sort of signal of we must be entering a truly deep reaching into the narratives, into the imaginaries, into the political interests, into all the structural systems, and maybe that goes a little bit against the notion it's just all about innovation. That to me, that occurs as well, but we shouldn't forget the endings and how people react to the endings. I saw, Karen, you had your hand up. Maybe you want to comment?
Yeah, I can follow up on that, because I think, if we look at transformation as a process, and in that process, we either shrink or we grow, in terms of how we relate to systems change. But it's also on, like, what are we measuring as transformative change? Like, what are the metrics we use? If we focus on carbon dioxide as the, the thing that we want to flip, then we turn it into a technical problem. We focus on behavioral changes, and new technologies and things, and we really avoid all the like the social and the political changes, we might come up with geoengineering as the only response in this narrative as climate change is inevitable, where there's nothing we can do, and we really bypass all the social and the political and the personal dimensions of change that are just an essential part of that. And so I think we should look at what exactly are we measuring to say that transformative change is coming about. And that brings into the qualitative, the social sciences, the humanities, like looking at narratives, looking at subjectivities and things as well.
Yeah. Uli, I saw your hand up, and then Cheikh, I want to come back to you on your transdisciplinary science. So Uli, before we go there.
I completely agree, Karen. It was, I hope my point was explicit that I'm not in favor of technological solutions, etc. But just one example for Europe. We are in the midst of this crisis of air transportation. Yeah, and a feeling and an initiative for social ecological transformation would be to take the initiatives for Stay Grounded to really cut back air transport and to build at least in Europe an infrastructure of a train network, etc., etc. This would be in the course a political intervention, yeah, which has to do with struggles, which has to do what is with the workers in the airline industry, etc., etc. But this would be in the course of a transformation process to think very concretely what are the initiatives to get rid of one major problem, which does not mean zero flying in the world, but a remarkable restriction and a remarkable cutback of using airplanes. This would be the process.
Great. Cheikh, I want to come back to something you said early on about the importance of transdisciplinary science, linking research and action in knowledge action networks to support a transformative shift. This discussion is part of the Transformations to Sustainability program, which is a research program that is exactly focused on that. And many times we ask ourselves the question, well, does the science itself need to transform? And if so, how? I wonder if you could start speaking to that, and then we'll come to the rest of you.
Yes, thank you, Susie. With your indulgence, I would just want to say one phrase on the technological transformation, which is right what my colleague just said. Because if you read about an old philosopher from the 68, Garrett Hardin, about the tragedy of communals, he clearly mentioned the importance of avoiding technological escalation, creating a technological problem and bringing a technological solutions. Some of the solutions we are living in right now do not have technological solutions. They have social solutions. They have value change solutions. The second point I want to make, we're talking about all this and we are going around SDGs anyway. There is an intuitive mindset that when you talk about SDGs, Africa is in the tail end. But if you go to the nitty-gritty of the indicators of each SDG, many of them, Africa is ahead of many developed countries. I just take the circular economy, SDG, recycling and using natural product. Mali is far ahead on the top list of that SDG in terms of achievement as compared to Germany, for instance. So this brings this bottom up and the context-specific dimensions of sustainability, because we are not on the same departure line, and then the space to cover to create transformation is different from one context to another. Now, talking about transdisciplinarity, Susie, you're totally right. This institute, which is Future Africa, which I have the pleasure and the honor to lead, has been created on the basis of these premises. The structure of the university are not fit for purpose for delivering sustainability science, because the faculties are still separated. Karen, you know that. The medical doctors are there, the economics are there, geographies are on the other side, and they rarely speak to each other. Future Africa has been created to create the stretching space, a platform of collaboration, where different disciplines, they come together. That's a starting point, because the policymakers, they did absolutely, I think, their homework by establishing SDGs, by establishing the Agenda 26.3, the Green Bond in Europe, the Green Stimulus in Africa. So many new policies, including the Development Bank, are based on cross-sectional areas of research and transformation. Then, to deliver the knowledge for those big questions, those big challenges, those grand challenges, the science needs, that's why I was saying at the beginning, the purpose should be the discovery. We need to redefine the type of science we are packaging the type of science we are converting for policymakers into something that brings together different set of knowledge, including the local knowledge, including the co-design and the mind of people for who we are implementing those policies in order to be comprehensive, but also to address the new complex issues we have in place. But we are totally like, we have so many miles to go, a big mountain to climb to arrive to that level of transdisciplinarity at universities.
Karen, can I put this in your ballpark too? Like, how do we change the science, or does it need to be transformative itself? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think we can probably, everybody on this webinar can agree that research as usual is just not enough. We can't just keep going the way we've been going, doing the research, but how do we, what is it that actually needs to shift? And I think that there's a distinction between like frameworks for understanding, so we can actually study transformation and understand it, versus frameworks for action. And we need like both and. And so how do we actually create changes in the world with society? And that, I think that was a lot of what was going, the ideas behind Future Earth, of co-production of knowledge, co-design of research and things, but actually getting out and doing that is the challenge, because we have to kind of get out of our very cognitive heads and actually connect with people. And then I think there's a much bigger role for the social sciences and the humanities and everything to actually start shifting the way we even talk about change. And then what qualifies as, like as research? Is it action research? Is it? And I think that's what the T2S program is really showing, is that there's just, that we have to actually engage very differently. And for researchers, not just research the objects, but actually be part of it. And to me, that's very much about like deep listening on both sides.
But is it really just deep listening? I keep thinking that if we do this co-design, co-production, if we are in this deeply engaged applied action research arena, does not come a point when the fundamental nature of science shifts into something else? Ulrich.
Yes, I would distinguish between science and academia. And NGOs are also scientific, and they are knowledge producers and many others. But I think I see the restrictions of the academia, and I am very much in line with Karen saying the frameworks of understanding. I would put myself much more in this line of research, a framework of understanding, basic research. But then also when I work in Austria with trade unions, and what is the role of trade unions in social ecological transformation processes? And then I step out of the academia, and then we start with a problem. The problem is not that we want to change the trade unions, but this is also, I think, Karen's point, start listening that within the trade unions, as an example, there are people who are not happy what is going on. They have there is Fridays for Future, they have children, etc., etc. They have environmental departments in the trade union. So we start to understand what is the problem and to shape it and to have a common language, and then to within or throughout the research process also to intervene in the practice of the stakeholders without saying them we have a privileged knowledge, but we have a different form of knowledge. This is the co-production point you said. But I'm always also an activist, but I am, as a scholar, I understand myself in the situation of a scholar who learns from other positions, from other interest groups, from other stakeholders. This is, the point. The third aspect is our own institution, academia, the University of Vienna, to struggle there for the changing of knowledge structures and knowledge production, because this is the basic research, not at all towards sustainability. It's competition, it's to get grants, third-party funding, etc., etc. So how to engage, for example, with your program and with other programs to shape the research landscape, which is also a third line of struggle we very often underestimate. Academia is not at all prepared for sustainability transformations.
Yeah. So I see a lot of questions come in. I want to make sure we have room. So I want to ask you one last question, which is slightly different from what I asked you before. And that is, we all currently live through COVID and the pandemic, and it not only changes our research and how we approach that in our practice, it actually might change the ways we think about transformation. And I wonder if each of you could just reflect in a brief moment here, one thing you have learned in this pandemic that has changed your way of thinking about transformation. Is there any way that this pandemic has rattled you in your thinking about transformation? What have you learned? Whoever wants to start.
I can just jump in. There are several things we learned. The first thing we learned.
One, Cheikh. We're gonna have to go to questions.
Yeah, I'll just stay on the first one. The first one we learned is the possibility for the academic world or the scientists to work together with the policymakers. In the past, many of the science which was generated and created for transformation stayed for a long time. Climate change is one of them, before the policymakers pick it. And from that lesson, what I think is we should accept to have a reverse model of knowledge sharing. Everybody wait for the university to make discoveries and bring it out. We should bring those actors outside the universities to come in, and we should have the humility to listen to them on the bearing, the direction that they think the society is embracing for the future, and we create discovery on those areas. That's my one single lesson.
Perfect. Karen.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that for me, it really brings out that whether we're talking about a pandemic or a flood or a hurricane or wildfires or anything, that it really surfaces the way that our systems are designed. And it shows like the winners and the losers, what works, what doesn't. And we see that, you know, like if you don't have a good healthcare system, if you don't have a good information system, if you don't have trust in the government and everything, you end up with like a society that is very polarized and very fragmented and paralyzed in terms of addressing these. So for me, I take a lot of the, like that this is really a great example to show like what, you know, how we can move forward collectively in this and how we should not, what we need to actually work on. And it goes into very much into looking at, you know, the structural dimensions, but also the value changes of people who don't, you know, care about other people falling ill and things, and how we can like overcome those as a society. I think it becomes more urgent for me.
Yeah. Uli, what have you learned?
Yeah, I learned also a lot, but one aspect is, as I'm a political scientist, and what I learned is that very much in line what Karen said, that the state is not the night watchman. It's not the regulator of an economy, which is in principle autonomous, but that we need infrastructures, public investment. We need strong state regulations, even against very powerful economic interests. And this was not thinkable a year ago. It's the 4th of March today, and a year ago, everything started. And the state was still in the perception. Of course, we had aspects of a welfare state and others, but in the perception, the state should draw back, should leave the economy by itself, mainly the global economy. And I think the learning process is that we need this strong public sector and the strong regulation for a good living for all. And this can be translated into social ecological topics and spheres.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we have amazing questions. Many are coming in. We can't answer all, but we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to just pick one here by Matthew Fisher. He says, there is not just multiple problems to address simultaneously, but the problems can be unique to a region or culture. How can we drive transformation with tailored solutions to each situation? As has been said before, many are divided on how to act or whether or not to act at all in those circumstances. What should we do? How do we do that in this tailored fashion, given that we have a global sustainability crisis? Who wants to take that?
I can start, but I think Cheikh already answered it in a sense that we need very local and very specific answers. And of course, we need universalized. I think that we need global rules, different global rules, not the free trade at any cost, not a liberal financial market, etc., etc. We need also a top-down process. That might be an difference with Cheikh, but you already said that we need this also local and bottom-up initiatives. And what I'm always hesitant is when we supposed to have universal answers. We need a universal understanding and we need universal principles, but I think many solutions are regional, are very local. The question, my point with the cutback of air traffic is a problem of the global north. I wouldn't claim it for Africa, yeah, but I think in reality this is already answered this question. There's always the danger to have supposedly universal solutions, but in fact we don't have.
Okay. Karen, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I could just say that, as a geographer, context matters. And even our ways of understanding top down, bottom up, local, global is just a construction in our heads. So how do we actually work from the context and what matters to people on the ground, but also that can also be taken to scale and what matters for everybody. And I think that's what we're talking about, a global systems change, and yet it has to be very unique and not a cookie cutter. Like all these ideas of roadmaps and blueprints and things like that, as if somebody is finding the solution for us and changing people, making people into objects to be changed, rather than actually activating that capacity in every location for transformative change.
Cheikh, do you want to add to this as well? Or
Yeah, very quickly. I think it was well answered. I think development is first of all local. The most important here is to check how much we can leverage and learn from those specific cases to consolidate a global transformation. Because this global umbrella transformation is an aggregation of everything which is happening in different contexts at different levels. Yeah, I agree with my colleagues.
So there's an interesting follow-on question to this, and it speaks a little bit to this tension that you just opened up, which is, on the one hand, we need global rules, and yet this very context-sensitive, specific action, that respects different cultures and situations. The question comes from Thais Moreno Suarez. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Are commons-like practices the strongest instrument we have to deal with the oligarchic power structures that want to keep business as usual and their control over the flow of money? I think, Uli, that speaks to you.
What is the beginning of the question? Was the commons?
Yeah, are commons-like approaches or structures the best tool to deal with these, the powers that be?
I'm not sure, because this would be also a universalizing answer. I would say, of course, common, if I got it right, the question commons is a very important aspect. I would also say other dimensions like a public economy, a solidary economy, which also produces for the market and others, to understand the variety of social ecological reproduction, then to look where are the power structures and where we can kind of change the power structures. This would be a bit my answer, and not that there is now, we have a strong debate in Europe about basic income. Is the basic income the solution to the crisis? And I would also be a bit hesitant, but to look very carefully at the places, at the experiences, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
I do think also that static quo or no change also benefits to many people. That many people, while we are looking as a society for transformation, they want to keep the business as usual, because there's some privilege which are related to that. And the oligarchy is one of them. I'm reading a book which is called Humankind. I'm so really, you have seen the book by Ulrich Brand. He says, when transformation is coming to society, those people who are resisting the most are the elite. And the elite in politics, the elite on economics, etc. But if it's bottom up, driven by the massive set of people who are living on harsh conditions and vulnerability, etc., to embrace new norms and new value, the transformation is likely to happen, because it's a force that cannot resist those people who are on the oligarchy or on the top elite level. Yeah, definitely. Good question.
Yeah. I think also just the point to point out that these, like the financial systems that exist, they don't come from nowhere. They actually are constructed by certain interests, and that raises that question also within science itself and education of challenging the givens and challenging these assumptions and really being able to like kind of undress what we take for as like, oh, these people have this power and everything. Because at the end of the day, all these transformations are about like who decides the future, whose values count, and it is highly political. But then can we actually, rather than going like this against it and where we meet the power, how do we design other things? And we've talked about the circular economy, we've talked about degrowth. There's a lot of other ways of organizing society, and I think that that's where many people are putting their attention on.
Just on that point of degrowth, I saw some question from the chat box, if I may, Susie. I'm always sometimes contended with my counterpart from the North when they just take degrowth as a model of transformation. When it comes to Africa, we can do sustainability through growth by improving the transformation of natural resource in a way which is very different to the pathway which have been followed by developed countries, currently what we call developed countries. You take the mining sector, you take the forest sector, you take agriculture, we can increase yield by adopting agroecological solutions rather than the modern intentional high yield agriculture that is being known somewhere else. So we can do a green revolution sustainably without using the same method in approach. So we are on the logic of growth. We can invest into GDP growth on sustainability issue. It's not opposing to development paradigm and development concept in that very case. Yeah.
Willie.
Yeah, 2 sentences. I have to jump in because we had last year in Vienna a very, very good conference on degrowth, international conference with 4,000 participants. I agree with you, Cheikh, but I would say it's not about more or less on certain qualities. Growth means the capitalist growth imperative to make profits, and we have to link it to the question of power, to the question of interest. And then I would say that this is the essence of degrowth. It's not that changed by disaster, that now the GDP goes back and this is fine. And so no, this is changed by disaster. But the change by design means to get rid or to cut back the growth imperative that everything has to grow at any cost.
Exactly. I totally agree with. Absolutely.
So can I build on that with another question from the chat? Joshua Grigsby put that forward. It's really the question of, when we say transformations to sustainability, there is an implicit thing here about that sustainability, whatever we have in mind, is more desirable. But we also know that many desirable things like flying or what you just mentioned, right? Growth in the economy, certain types of jobs are not sustainable. They might be desirable, but they're not sustainable, right? In a physical, ecological, even cultural or social sense. So I wonder if you can each maybe close this conversation with an example of when you were successful grappling with stakeholders or with partners you work with who had very different ideas of what we should be striving toward. What is the sort of goal we all work together? What happened? What worked in those situations? When we abstractly talk about, some people hold the power and the elites, whatever, I always find like, okay, that leaves us nowhere because we're, in some ways, yes, we're part of an elite, we're privileged, and we're not at some of those levers. So give me a concrete example of when you successfully worked through having very different ideas of what we're striving toward with any partners or stakeholders that you work with. Karen, do you want to start us off on this closing round?
Gosh, that's like an exam question.
I know, it's hard to find the good ones, isn't it?
It's hard to find that. And I think that just more generally, like, rather than coming up with the solutions for people and having my own set of just really saying like what matters to you. And really getting into, like, I think it's about shifting those conversations and really figuring out like a starting point that opens up rather than shuts down the dialogue about sustainability. And sustainability has, like transformation, it's a problematic concept. And, like we've talked about like a thrivable world or other ways of actually depicting it. But when we're focusing on qualities like equity and social justice and meaning and things that make life worth living, then I think we have to really connect with exactly what matters to people and to show them that they also matter and that it's not just this, like the world that we have designed really, it is falling apart in many ways. And what we're talking about here is intentional transformations to avoid being transformed by climate change, biodiversity loss, all the, the issues that we're focusing on.
Uli, do you want to go next?
I take your example with flying. The principle, one major principle would be to try not to live at the cost of others and at the cost of nature. This is what we call the solidary mode of living and mode of production. And when we come to flying in Europe, flying is desirable. And I would say, no, a solidary mobility is desirable, that I can move, but without destroying nature. So we need in Europe a good public transport system. I don't have to fly for 20 euro from Vienna to Mallorca or to Barcelona to London, but to have a right to kind of to fulfill a desire, which is to have a certain mobility, but not at any cost. And flying means in many times at any cost, cheap flying, etc., etc. So to shape the discourse from flying to a solidary mobility system, and this implies, and then I close with this, to look also at the production side. This is why I do research with trade unions. Yeah, not to forget the workers, not to forget them who are the non-privileged in the sense when we have a structural change of the economy. Yeah. And if we look at the international level as well, what is the implication for African countries when the Europe needs less resources? What is the implication? And not to do this at the back of the workers who produce today the commodities for Europe, but to have a process that they can have and make their living differently.
Yeah, Cheikh, example in your context.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think examples of transformation that are happening are often happening on the background of the more sold, processes. I'm taking the example of agriculture. The modern agriculture with mineral fertilizers, with heavy irrigations, is the same which have been promoted with the Green Revolution. But on the background of that Green Revolution, there was a big resistance by local livelihood to sustain diversity, to maintain agroforestry, to conserve biodiversity, to support multifunctional landscape approach, which make it now, as we return to the concept of creating agriculture, doing an agriculture in a different way, that serve as a lesson for the world to develop new process of producing food, quality food, biofood, that can serve the purpose of the environment, the ecosystem, and health of people. So some of the examples you are looking, Susie, you should not look at on the big sold model, the big marketing model. They're happening on the background sometimes. The awareness of people that this is better than that. And in US, where I spent almost 4 years at Star International, I was pleased to see that the Americans themselves are looking for product coming from Africa, local Adult soya, because they know this product do not have gluten, it's natural, it's pure. Who triggered that? It's an awareness campaign that happens in the background of the marketing campaign that the big internationals are doing for refined chocolate, for refined milk, for refined everything. So those examples, I think, should be uploaded to the rest of the world to show that it's possible to create a social mindset shift that create transformation the way we reach, the way we want it in society.
I think you all just now actually gave a better answer to the question of what are we looking for? It seems to me when we have these shifts in conversation, that's when we are apparently at the threshold with a transformative change. Whether or not it happens is yet to be determined, but at least we're having much deeper conversations than just to fix something or to, it seems to me you each now mentioned something really profound about what to look for. So it's a minute before the top of the hour, so I have to close us out. Thank you so much to each of you for participating in this. We could obviously talk for a long time. We had so many questions, we could continue that for a long time. We're going to capture them. I hope Lizzie or Sarah, you're catching the chat so we have that. And can continue to think about these wonderful comments and questions. Thank you to all the audience for your participation. It's wonderful to see this much interest. And again, let's stay in this conversation. Everyone, please stay safe, keep your masks on when you're outside. And thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It was a real
Thank you,
pleasure.
Susie.
Bye.
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 Bye, colleagues. Bye.